Alrighty, we are Power Fist. Kieran's here, I'm here. This is another episode of Heresy on the drive home. And today we're talking about what we spoke about in our last segment, conceptualizing your force. And now we're going to start bringing that into reality and sort of the steps that we take to translate our ideas into our models. So what do you think about that, Kieran?
This is probably my favorite part of the hobby, I reckon. It's where you start to take some of those ideas that have been bubbling around in your brain for months or years and actually translating them into models that you can use in your games and show to your friends. So this is a really important part of the hobby for me, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it today.
Do you think it's an area that some hobbyists may struggle with? Because I know for myself, it's taken a number of years to really understand the process and to get sort of, if you're an artist, for example, get what's in your head onto the canvas, so to speak, and to have those two images or end products match up as close as possible. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. That's something I've always struggled with. I think I'm a little bit better with it these days. I've kind of as I've developed my skills, I can more closely match what my expectations are. But for many, many years, trying to match what I wanted and what I'd always imagined for a particular army or model and translating that into the physical form was always a massive challenge. And it's why many of my early projects never really went anywhere, because they didn't match how I wanted them to be. And but these days, with a few more skills, particularly airbrushing, I'm far more confident to translate, the creative ideas into the physical world. Yeah,
I think. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say, is that have you kind of found something similar in that it's changed for you over the years, or has it always just been kind of?
It has. It's kind of a muscle that you work and build up on time over time. And it's important that you mentioned, the one-off sort of things that don't quite work, because those little, flirtations with a new idea, or, you might have a moment of weakness where you butterfly to a new sort of army idea really quickly. Those little, what you might consider failures or whatnot, they're really, really constructive building blocks to get you to a level where you can then sort of start really translating that and coming through the other side with the fruits of your labors.
Yeah,
I've definitely experienced that over my journey. I've had so many failed projects, it's not funny.
I think everybody's like that, and it's something that people need to know, especially people that are new to the hobby. Don't expect it to work out perfectly for you every single time. You will have projects that you just can't get for some reason. You just can't get the color right, or perhaps the particular style that's necessary for that army or faction just doesn't suit the way you paint at that current time. But it's definitely something that you can improve on, and that doesn't,
you can always
just because
set
you can't do it
yourself
now, it doesn't mean you can't do it in the future, right?
Yeah, exactly right. You can always set yourselves, little stepping stones in order to get there. In this particular army project, I want to achieve X, Y, and Z. It's not it. Yeah, it's really hard to go from the crawl to a sprint, straight away. It does take time, but that's where all the fun and experimentation lies in with this sort of army stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not to say that, because the quality of your model produce, is not reflective on, the rich conceptualization of your army. The end product, is not representative of how rich your idea may be. It's not a blight on your idea. We're just talking through decades of experience, in the hobby that's kind of led us up to this point. But for newer hobbyists or hobbyists that may not be as experienced, you could still have just the same amount of richness in your and quality in your army conceptualization, even
Yep.
though your execution, may be tabletop standard, for example.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
just because that's the case does not knock your idea in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't let that, the any kind of limitations or skill issues that you have kind of dictate your aspiration. Like, you need to be aware of what you can do. And I definitely kind of, I'm careful not to go too far out of my comfort zone if I'm doing an army. If I'm doing like one-off projects, I'm happy to push that because I don't care if I have a failure. But if I'm doing, an army that needs to be consistent, I will be kind of aware of those limitations. But just, yeah, to anyone who's new to the hobby or struggles with that kind of conceptualization, definitely don't kind of, limit yourself based on your current skills. You need to try new things. And generally, I find, for myself at least, that when I try something new, it usually turns out better than I expected. I don't know, maybe it's like just a pessimistic mindset, but whenever I try a new kind of hobby skill, it generally turns out fairly well. So, yeah, just push yourself a little bit and try new things, and give it a go.
So last step we talked about getting inspiration from black books, black library, artwork. You've got that idea in your head now. You've been sitting on it for a while. What are the first sort of stages or first sort of steps that you take to then translate that aesthetically into some model ideas? Is it different for each force, or do you go through a similar sort of process?
It is different for each force. It depends what my expectations for that army are. Like, for example, like with my Alpha Legion, I wanted an army that I could play with quickly, that would be fun on the tabletop, and so I was less kind of concerned with like a deep level of conceptualization when it came to designing the models and the paint job. Of course, I still put 100% effort into those models, but I just didn't go that extra kind of further step as far as trying to make them entirely unique or creative.
And that's
And that kind
completely
of
fine, because your
absolutely,
primary objective for that was
yeah,
it's a gaming army.
yeah, exactly. So I was completely happy with that and totally fine with that.
And also, to
And
your
I do
credit, you
find it.
pumped them out too. You pumped them out like a
I did.
sweatshop. It was so quick. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really enjoyable kind of part of the hobby as well, like getting to play some games with your models. And it's all well and good spending blood, sweat, and tears to get models exactly the way you want them to, but unless you're
It
very
comes it
highly
comes at a
motivated and
price.
disciplined, yeah, exactly. Unless you're highly motivated and disciplined, you might lose interest in that project if it's taking too long and it's not kind of going the way you want it to. Yeah. And the reverse of that is my Emperor's Children, which are kind of far more a labor of love, and I'm willing to take more time to kind of get them exactly right and to put in the extra effort to find the bits that I want and to get the models to match kind of more closely what I expect them to in my imagination. I
Yeah.
was
Okay.
kind of
So
fortunate in that regard. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
So touch on wrong model here. Touch on your Emperor's Children, for example. Right. So what
Yeah.
was your selection process in order to get from your idea to this, for example?
So you can generally guide yourself with the aesthetic that's being kind of established by the Games Workshop models, of course. And if
Yeah.
you don't want to kind of spend a lot of time conceptualizing and doing all that kind of stuff, you can use the generic models because, of course, they have their established look and design. But for my own, I wanted to use those larger Tortuga models, which meant I had to do a little bit of kind of reverse engineering. So I have used um, Emperor's Children parts on the models, but in general, I wanted to stick to those kind of loyalist kind of Emperor's Children aesthetics of like clean lines, flourishes, bright armor panels. Those kind of more kind of heroic aspects of Space Marines rather than the kind of more brutal
Yep.
aspects of, say, the World Eaters or the Death Guard. So when I was looking for parts on different websites and from different companies, I was looking for things that kind of fit that clean, classical Roman, Greek kind of aesthetic. And that's really how I thought about the Emperor's Children when I was looking
Yeah,
for different parts.
doing almost like product research in a way, right? Because we're going to
Yeah,
touch on third party elements like Tortuga and 3D printed parts and that sort of stuff at the end of the discussion. But
yeah,
that was part of your R&D almost, right? Is to
yeah,
go out, see what's out there, see what's going to be suitable to match that vision in your head.
yeah. And I was, like I was saying, it's totally fine to use the standard Games Workshop models, but if they don't have everything that you want in them, or you want, to use elements of those models, say, you love the Palatine Blade models, they're fantastic models, but they look a bit small and dinky these days,
Yeah.
or you just want to use elements of those kind of designs in other units across your force, and you don't want to reuse the same 5 models again and again. That's when you go outside of standard Games Workshop channels and start looking around for other parts to add that same flavor and kind of character to your army kind of more generally.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
generally how I do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of the same. I, in that vision in my head, I kind of I already see what armor marks my force is made up of, what it probably doesn't have access to, or what armor
Yeah.
mark may not fit that particular legion.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, like Mark 6 in a Death Guard army or an Iron Warriors army is probably a perfect example.
Yeah.
Even though that taboo in the fluff has been kind of retconned since the Mark 6 models came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It still is. There's a bit of taboo associated with that. So I mean, I can speak to my salamanders a little bit. I mean, the start of
Yeah.
the force was quite Terminator heavy. So I was primarily going to just focus it as a Zone Mortalis force of just all Terminators and get it
Yeah.
up and ready for a friend's event that he was running. Didn't make the deadline. Classic army failure there of not meeting
Yeah.
deadlines. So
Yeah.
I saw the journey through though, because they're the models that I'd spent that much time working on.
Mm-hmm.
And I also I knew in Terminators, I wanted to carry through that similar sort of aesthetic. We touched on it last episode about making them cold and brutal and spiky and all
Yeah.
that sort
Yeah.
of stuff. So I still wanted to carry some of those elements over onto the Terminators. So the whole force would still look very similar, and the design language of it all would make sense as a cohesive sort of force. So, I mean, even though this is a standard plastic cataphracti Terminator torso and arms, I've gone for Grave Warden style legs because it's got the extra banding and the trimming on them.
Yeah.
And I've also gone for the 3D printed Sons of Horus head, because that sort of matches the elements I spoke about last episode with, the dinosaur sort of elements to the fire drakes that had already
Yeah.
been designed and that sort of stuff. So I wanted to carry that design language through onto the Terminator models. Now,
Yeah.
for something like Power Armored Marines, even though it wasn't something that I was working on the force at the very beginning because I had so many Terminators to get through, I did have a really strong idea of what the force should be made up of, marks-wise. We touched on the fluff of the force sort of last episode, but I mean, they got decimated at Isfahan 3, which was early in the Heresy. So I knew I wanted lots of sort of Mark 2 and a little bit of Mark 3 in there as well. But they're also survivors, right, of this old war that have sort of carried their way through the Heresy and become Black Shields and Scavengers. And it would be appropriate that they'd have lots of Mark 5 as well, right?
Yeah.
Because that is, the quintessential sort of mid to late Heresy scavenging, reaving force. That's what, their armor is sort of made up of, just cobbled together things, which is that sort of Mark V Heresy pattern. So, I quickly pumped out a rapier squad for the force as well, and that's just a mixture of some Mark V guys in there. To give an example of sort of where I'm headed with that, but again, like I didn't really see much Mark VI as very suitable for this force. I'm really limiting my Mark IV as well, even though it would be in the force. Just limiting its use as well, because it tends to be some of that more refined, sleeker, better lines. That sort of aesthetics generally better for something like the Emperor's Children, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of where you've stepped outside the kind of official lines.
Well, that's exactly right.
What you need in your force and how you imagine it isn't available, right?
Exactly. Which sort of like brings you to that next sort of point is, okay, well, if the stuff isn't available to you, how are you going to start planning your conversion work to make up for the lack of product that's available?
Yeah.
So I made the conscious decision while conceptualizing this army to bite the bullet and get a printer, mainly for just accessories and stuff like that, which we'll touch on in a bit. However, in the meantime, there's still really been nothing available for the two major armor marks that I wanted, Mark II and Mark V. So, I had to find an answer to that. And just so happens to be that I'm actually printing more than what I anticipated, because that's the stuff that kind of aligns to my vision.
It's the slippery slope. It
is a slippery slope. I know. What have I done? Full Anakin Skywalker mode, but.
And that's just the balance, right, between the different kind of approaches where, if you were doing purely a gaming army, you weren't too bothered, then you could just stick to the plastics and you wouldn't kind of be as concerned about the fluff, right? You'd probably just do Mark III plastic legionaries, but because, this is a labor of love, it's something that you want to put your individual touch on and, want it to look kind of, different, but, close as possible to how they should be in the fluff. You need to kind of be a bit more creative with it because those kind of elements aren't available at the moment.
Yeah. I can quickly touch on, how that kind of differs to the Thousand Suns army that I did. And that was that was before 3D printing technology was really sort of a thing even,
Back
it was
when we
more
did stuff
sort
with
of
green
like,
stuff,
it was, back old school days. But, I was just working with Games Workshop kits and plastic kits, and the challenge was, well, how do I embellish these things to make them look more like the artwork, to make them look more like what's in my head? And that's where I had to sort of get into the sculpting sort of side, which is what we spoke about last episode as well. And then using, little bits and pieces from other kits that were out there that might be a little bit more Zentian. I mean, I used components from some Rubric Marines, some of the Exalted Sorcerers from 40k, even some Zangor weapons and that sort of stuff, just to get the more esoteric looks into the army through, trim or weaponry or whatever it is. So, again, looking at the product, seeing what's available really helps plan your conversions out.
I was going to ask, like, when you go looking for those pieces, are you looking for specific pieces or are you just looking in kind of ranges that will have relevant pieces for inspiration?
I think so. I think so. If you go look at the Zench range, whether it's in 40k or in Sigma, almost forgot the name of the game for a second. That's how popular it is. It does have that design language that carries through both those ranges. You do have the esoteric weapons, you do have the signature Zenchian swirl or the eye, and that sort of stuff, which does port over and translate. So I looked at the range as a whole and then started cherry picking. Yeah, okay, I want one of those. That'll be a great weapon for my Centurion. That'll be good on, a squad sergeant. That might be helpful to, my dreadnought conversion or whatever it is. So yeah, looking outside of just directly what's Horus Heresy as well can really influence the way your final army looks as well through your conversion work.
Yeah, and being the hobby fans that we are, we pretty much see everything that's released, right? So we'll often just lock away ideas in our brains that we'll come back to sometime down the future.
Yeah, just lock that
like you were
into
saying,
the cogitator bank.
Yeah, even if there's no plan for it right now, yeah. But like you were saying, like looking outside the specific range of a faction or an army is a really kind of good thing to do. Personally, I love to do that a lot.
Yeah,
These examples I'm showing on the screen right now, they're 40k models with, I think there's a 30k head and a 30k pistol, and everything else is 40k on those models. So, look outside the ranges, look at other models. Particularly obviously there's kind of very obvious examples such as Chaos Space Marines from 40k being perfect for word bearers, or even late Heresy Night Lords, or Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, all of those ranges. So just looking for bits in different kits. On the word bearer there, he's got that mace, and that's a mace from a Dark Angels model, because they have the same kind of monkish, kind of priestly kind of aesthetic that translates really well between the two different factions. I've also done similar things, but a little bit different with my Alpha Legion, my recent Alpha Legion army. Including Dianat and Exodus in my army, but painting them in the Imperial Fist colors while removing all of the Alpha Legion detail.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've got some cheeky little hints there to the fact that there are actually Alpha Legion, but people often complain that their particular legion or faction hasn't got a new Praetor model or what have you. And that's totally understandable, because everybody wants, the attention they think they deserve. And, every faction should have its Praetor.
Imperial Fists don't deserve the attention.
I thought you were going to say the Space Wolves, but I suppose, yeah, the Imperial Fists have had more than enough.
Are the Space Wolves still in the Heresy? I don't know. Are they?
Oh, who knows, man? I think they all died at the start, didn't they? Anyway, you can look outside, the range. So these are, Alpha Legion models, but the way they're painted, if I hadn't been cheeky with little XX symbols all over them and that kind of thing, they could easily be Imperial Fist models and, fit in perfectly fine.
Yeah.
That Terminator in the middle is a, it's a 40k Dark Angels model. It translates really nicely to a Templar looking kind of Terminator. So
because you still got that monkish sort of
exactly.
Aesthetic. Come through.
So many different places to look. Like, even if your faction hasn't just got a new release, anything that's released, like, unless it's like a heavily detailed model with sculpting that's attached to it all over the place, can be translated really well into a lot of different factions. Like, I haven't got a photo up for it at the moment, but I've been painting a lot of Dark Angels characters recently, and none of them, I think, one of them is based on a Dark Angels models, but most of them aren't on Dark Angels models. They're just on generic 30k characters, or even 30k special characters that, with a tiny little bit of creativity and conversion work, can look perfectly fine as Dark Angels. And that's one of my favorite things in the hobby, is finding models from one faction and taking them across convincingly into another faction. Just creating something new, something a bit, individualistic. And that was a big part of the hobby at the start of Heresy, way back in the day. Like, the joke is that Alexis Pollux was in every single army as a Praetor of some sort.
Yeah.
You see that a little bit less these days, I think. Maybe there's
Short King, big up Short King.
Yeah, big up Short Kings, but just because there's so many there's so much variety these days. Nearly everyone has a Praetor, not everyone, but nearly everyone. That you don't have to do that kind of thing anymore. But I still take a great amount of joy from taking a model from one faction and converting it into another faction, because it shows a little bit of skill, it shows a bit of creativity,
and it shows that you're going that extra yard.
Exactly. Yeah, something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I think now's sort of the perfect time to address, third-party elements. The hobby is always changing, and now we've kind of entered this age of printing being super accessible,
Yeah.
and influential to how you sort of produce your army. But
Yeah.
there are other sort of suppliers out there, whether they be printed or resin or whatever. Like you mentioned Tortuga before, that's a perfect example,
Yeah.
of there's a multitude of things at everyone's disposal now. So if anything, it actually makes individualizing armies even more accessible, I think.
Oh, so accessible these days. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's crazy. So do you I know you're a fan of Tortuga and the scale of it. Um,
Yeah.
is there anything else you kind of look at outside of that, or what are you kind of looking at these days?
Um, Not too much, to be honest. At the moment, I've mostly been working on just standard Games Workshop models. I I've used a few 3D printed models, pieces rather, not full models. But in general, yeah, I usually use either like the Tortuga for the larger scale and the full variety of armor marks, or standard kind of Games Workshop parts.
That, yeah,
Um,
are generally always in stock as well. Crazy to
yeah,
think.
yeah, I know all the stuff they're going through as well at the moment. But yeah, like I really enjoy their range. I've used a couple of 3D printed parts, but I think like you, I've been a 3D skeptic for a long time. Like, we're
Mm,
both kind of coming around from that kind of position, but we
yeah,
still kind of haven't fully embraced it, right? Have we? Like, I know you're using a lot of 3D parts, but you're very selective with what you use, and you've
yeah,
even like commissioned artists to create things for you that match kind of exactly what you're after.
yeah, exactly. Because even though there is a lot out there, this is the way I look at it.
Yeah,
It's like trying to find a good band on the internet now. Like you have to trawl and trawl and trawl through so much slot music in order to get to a good song or a good band, or something that is tasteful, that you can really sink your teeth into. And it's, to me, it feels a little bit sort of similar in the 3D realm, with some designers. Obviously, there are some freaking amazing designers that sort of sit head and shoulders above the rest,
yeah,
and a lot of them, have a license through a licensed printer, or share their license through a printer, um,
yeah,
to make things a little bit more accessible for people. But I think you're right. Like printing is kind of my my I'd call them high, I guess, but high standards are kind of here, and printing's slowly been, reaching that sort of threshold. And now that they're about even, that's when I sort of felt the need to take the plunge on it. And
yeah,
I mean, what the printing does, for me personally, is it cuts down my conversion time.
yeah,
So time that
yeah,
I would spend normally converting standard models, resin, plastic, or whatever, into what I wanted, I can just make some supports on a model and hit print, and I know it's going to be right every single time,
yeah,
to my tastes. So it's
yeah,
cutting out the labor component, right? Because
yeah,
you need to juggle hobby with your life,
yeah,
and making parts more accessible and more efficient to get there is kind of perfect for where I'm at, in life anyway. I don't have 20, 30, 40 hours to spend converting just one squad to make it the way I want to, when I can just print the
yeah,
piece, right?
yeah,
Yeah, so that is, to me, that is the biggest boon of having a printer. It's the efficiency that comes with it.
yeah. I
Yeah,
don't
so
have a printer, and I don't use many 3D printed parts, but I feel like just seeing what's out there has kind of lowered my kind of pain tolerance to conversions as well. So in a way, I'm limiting the conversions I do now, because I'm like, oh, that's a lot of work. Like I'm sure
yeah,
someone's designed that, or there's an easier way to do that. and like I'm not going to go and look for those things most of the time, but it kind of just stops me in my tracks now and again on different conversions and like projects I could plan and stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm sure there's something easier, some easier way of doing that. And I used to like love cutting up models and doing all of that kind of stuff, and I still do, but I kind of limit it now to characters rather than like whole armies or larger projects. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
Everything
it's
just
had that
seems
kind of
like a lot of it.
indirect effect on me of lowering my personal pain tolerance to conversions
Yeah,
or
100%.
sculpting more specifically. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So that kind of wraps things up. Is there anything else you want to sort of mention?
No, just like a last bit of encouragement to people to try new things out. Um, you know, have what don't let your your skill level or what's available kind of limit your creativity and what you kind of how you conceptualize your army. There is so many resources out there these days. Artists you can commission. There's a whole slew of different 3D parts. Like you said, a lot of it is not at a level that I would consider using,
Yeah.
but a lot of people have lower tolerances to that and are happy to just get into it and print off armies and have fun with them on the tabletop. So yeah, just the world's your oyster these days. Like you don't have to learn how to 3D sculpt things or use plastic art or anything like that anymore. But learning those skills is still really useful. And just I'd encourage people just to try new things and not to like completely limit themselves to off the shelf models or just straight 3D printed models. There's nothing more satisfying than converting something and making it your own. And I just encourage people to individualize their stuff and express themselves through their models, because this hobby is like it's so much fun, right? Like it's a joy, it's a therapy, it's it's just a big part of our lives. So just get the most out of it you possibly can, and don't limit yourself to what you think might be possible.
Yeah, and when you take the effort to go that extra mile or the extra yard,
Yeah,
and you finish what you're working on, it's a really rewarding feeling. There's
and
no
people
better
recognize it
feeling in
too.
this hobby, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It
People
is.
really appreciate it as
It's
well when they see
that's
other people's projects that are different and
that's the
stand out, and
therapy. I
there's
like it.
obviously had a lot of effort put into them. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. With that, Kieran, that's episode 2 in the can. Bash. And
Send it.
yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Cool.
For Heresy.